Well, the US has recorded a further 900 coronavirus deaths after topping more than 1,000 deaths for 4 straight days last week. At least 146,000 Americans have now died from the virus. Models predict fatalities may hit 175,000 by the 15th of August. Let's head to the US now, and joining me live is our US contributor, Michael Ware. Michael, good morning. We are now 100 days out from the US election. America looks like a country in crisis. So how do you think this will impact the 2020 election?
Well, I think it's very much laying out the central pillars that this election is going to be fought around. I mean, as you can tell, you just got to look at the TV. You know, coronavirus, there's 4 million Americans who've been infected, over 140,000 who have died. You quoted one number of those who may die by the end of the year. There's some estimate as many as 200,000 are going to die by the end of the year. And remember, two-thirds of Americans don't believe what their own president is telling them about the coronavirus. So who handles the coronavirus better? Right now, only 1 in 3 Americans believe that that's President Trump, as opposed to his presidential candidate or his presidential rival, Joe Biden. We also have race. We've seen these protests in the street. Well, look, the protests that we first saw that went for about a month, well, they've started to die down now. But there are cities where these protests continue. In fact, last night we saw in Portland and in Seattle that the police had to declare a riot situation and go storming in. But the general protests across the country, by and large, have died down. So this issue of race has now been left for the election. The people have spoken. They need changes. What can anyone deliver in this election? And as COVID is spreading, obviously that's affecting the economies. All these states that opened up, they opened too soon. And now they're paying for it. They've got to close back down and their hospital systems are awash. And these are the red states. These are Republican states who at first followed the president's lead and decided to open. And so obviously that's going to impact the election too. Republican voters are finally feeling the effects of the coronavirus.
I don't know about that though, Michael. I mean, I'm still dubious of all of those polls. And it depends which ones you look at, because I read a stat on the weekend that suggested that Donald Trump's probably still got 85% of his base. So, you know, if he holds on to that, is that enough to get him over the line again?
Absolutely not, no. His base is absolutely rusted on. Right?
Yeah.
He could count on.
But that's my point. So most of them are still there.
Yeah, but that's not enough to get him over the line. You see, let's call his rusted on base 26%, just plucking it out of the air. Then you have other Republicans, because he's got the rabid, hardcore Republicans. Now, among Republicans, he once had 95% support from all Republicans. That's now dropped down into the 80s. He needs those other Republicans. So many Republicans are saying, I'm simply just not going to vote. I don't want to vote for Biden, but I'm not voting for Trump. And there's 13% of the constituency is in play. They are undecided. And among them, the vast majority say, well, if I eventually, I'm pushed to pick someone, I'll pick Biden over Trump. So no. The numbers he's got will not win him the election as it stands. And in fact, studies keep coming out to say if the polls are as wrong this time as they were last time, Biden still romps it in, even with the wrong polls.
Just before we go, I want to get your thoughts on Australia's relationship with China at the moment. So there's been a bit of a tete-a-tete over the weekend. I referred to that with David Sharma on the show a little bit earlier. So the Global Times, it's the Communist Party mouthpiece. It's making noise again. So over the weekend, Michael, Australia basically challenged Beijing's ownership of the islands in the South China Sea, right? So it basically follows what the US has done. So now the Global Times says, well, you don't really know, you haven't done your research. We may well come back at you with more tariffs on wine and on beef as well. What do you make of this situation that's taking place at the moment?
Yeah, well, Australia should expect Beijing to play hardball, mate. Listen, I think we're pretty much at the point where we can say this Trump administration is taking us into a new Cold War with the Chinese. In fact, the Secretary of State all but came out and said that in an address on Thursday, where he was asked, is this a new Cold War? And he said, well, call it what you like. America is suddenly taking very aggressive and staunch actions against the Chinese. The Attorney General has warned American companies from corporate appeasement with China by sharing American technology with them. The FBI came out in the last few days and said they're opening a Chinese-related counter-espionage investigation every 10 hours. Now, China is calling for America to take a step back. And they said, we don't want this kind of confrontation. But the people in the Trump administration are very anti-China. This is either their last roll of the dice before the election, in case they lose, that they've gotten tougher and harder, and they've created a Cold War, or they're trying to reshape American foreign policy even beyond this election. Now, that also affects Australia, as you say. Secretary of State Pompeo comes out and says Chinese claims in the South China Sea are absolutely false. Australia echoes that.
Yeah.
Remember, Australia has done, rite of passage convoys with America through these waters, and Australia right now may be getting involved in a massive naval exercise with the Americans and India at the end of this year, which Beijing will see as a very aggressive move. So if America's going into a Cold War, then so are we.